Okay. Hi, Todd. Welcome to the Explorer Poet podcast.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. As we were talking just before we started recording, I was explaining that I came across your name when I went to basically to the ballot box to vote this last election cycle because you had your name on the list here in the state of Idaho, the beautiful state of Idaho. And I usually don't get into politics, as I was saying. I'm much more interested in the kind of the psychological side of it, the why people lean one way or the other. But there's so many big shifts happening, and one of those big shifts is actually that I think both of the parties, the major parties here in America, are have been in the process of reinventing themselves for several years. And I think one of them obviously now is going to really have to reinvent itself to become a little bit more relevant. Um, but you're a member of the Libertarian Party and you ran as a libertarian. So just to get started, maybe I would love to just hear your backstory and how you came to, I don't know, believe the things that you believe, and what are those philosophies.
Sure. Um, so I was raised by kind of Depression era parents that were Reaganites, Republicans, conservative. I grew up in Utah. My dad was a New York Italian, and he had what I think is a very healthy mistrust of government. And that's probably where I got that. He was a member of like the Birch Society. And so interestingly, I've always had kind of a mistrust on government, but I had, since I have a degree, a science degree, a mechanical engineering degree, a Bachelor of Science, I held scientists in the medical field at a higher esteem, higher value than perhaps they deserved. And then really, you hear the term the red pill. Well, through the COVID pandemic, uh, that was the huge red pill for me to realize that, oh, scientists and doctors can be bought as easy as politicians. Um, I mean, I was always had a libertarian mindset of just in uh, personal liberty, freedom. I mean, I think this country was founded on libertarian principles. The greatest libertarian document ever written was the Declaration of Independence. Um, and I've always been kind of an independent voter, just looking. I didn't really sign up to a specific party. I looked at the individual. Um, you're probably not old enough, but like Ross Perot, as he ran as an independent. After that, they really rigged the system to try and keep just the duopoly, the uniparty in power. Um, Ron Paul, a big hero of mine. So that's really where libertarian principles got on my radar. And they really align with that. Um, and then going back to how I had no desire to be in politics. I don't really have a desire to boss anybody around or rule anybody, but if I saw the authoritarianism that broke out in America through the COVID pandemic, and I didn't realize how far down that road we were, and it frightened me. I have children and grandchildren, and if not me, who? I felt like I needed to at least start getting more involved. So I'd say I was a small L libertarian prior, and then got joined the national party and the state party, got involved, became part of the board. They asked me to run for office, so I agreed. And so just trying to move the country back in the direction, which is what I think it was founded on, is libertarian principles. Again, the Declaration of Independence. Even if we move back to the Constitution, but uh, would be great. That'd be a huge win to move back to just let's just do what the Constitution allows. But the federal government doesn't follow the Constitution at all. They tread on those our natural rights constantly. So yeah, we can expand from there. But that's kind of how I got went from watching, observing, just being advocate for, freedom and personal liberty, but then just got shaken, awoke um, through the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic's a really interesting time period because of I think exactly what you said. A lot of people weren't as aware that we just weren't aware how far down the authoritarian path we already were, and really just oh man, now the view of the medical establishment and what it actually cares about, what it actually promotes, how it actually operates. Yeah, I think that if anybody got through COVID without feeling like they got red pilled, then they just either weren't paying attention or it's almost as if they just kind of okay. So I think about it psychologically a lot, and when you grow up in certain families, you may go to certain schools, you may participate in certain religious groups. There's almost it's not comfort's not the right word, but there's like a sense of feeling like a familiarity in being treated in a certain way. And if you got through COVID without feeling like you were being mistreated, then it's almost as if you've already been psychologically broken to be mistreated.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. Our public education system tends to uh, teach kids to obey authority. And you look at everything that's pushed in schools, and I mean, yeah, through the pandemic, again, the math, and I watch too many science fictions and pandemic movies and stuff, so I'm like, holy crap, when that first happened, and then I'm like, the mask mandate, and I start doing the math around grandma's cotton mask that she gave you to wear and versus the size of the virus and water vapors that it's traveling. And I'm like, oh, that makes no sense. And then to see people, the social media censorship that was going on, and you couldn't talk about it being from a lab. And a lot of doctors, and they had a lot at stake, tried to speak up against it, talking about we're rushing the vaccine out. We don't know the long-term impacts. And boy, they were threatened and coerced and stuff. And, you couldn't mention, in fact, I was running the social media for the Libertarian Party, and I was getting Facebook jail for making comments that I'm just like, wow, we are in serious trouble. This goes against everything that I believe is especially, the freedom of speech is the number one amendment, and for a reason. If we lose that, we lose everything. And to see that, it's funny too, libertarians will be, well, it's a private company that they can do what they want. Uh-huh, they can. But private companies, unless there's some motivation, do not alienate their customers. And so now all this with the Twitter files, and now Zuckerberg and all these people are coming out, and you see how much money was being funneled and how the FBI and the government was basically threatening these people to, we like this, we don't like this, you need to censor this person, you need to, cancel this person. Absolutely shocking. So yeah, anybody that went through that wasn't paying attention. It was almost like, I look at it as, we have normalcy bias. I mean, I certainly have certain viewpoints, but I really try to not look at things emotionally. I try to, because I'm an engineer, I look at them logically and try to think through it, and also try to see different viewpoints. And man, people I would talk to through that, and even now through the last 4 years of the Biden administration, I'm like, you guys are watching a different life movie than I am watching. It was like, and I really like, okay, I'm stuck in my, what's that called, where your own little bubble of what you believe
Yeah,
and what you
an echo
like.
chamber.
You're right. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that. I want to see the bigger picture. And so I try to rationalize where they're coming from. And man, I'm just like, you guys are living in a different dimension. It was a really strange time for me.
Yeah, it really does feel like two very separate realities emerged. And I've heard it explained a bunch of different ways, but the one that maybe makes the most sense to me is the just very simply those who want to trust the institutions and those who don't trust the institutions, right? Or said another way, it's people who I've even recently heard it said very simply that it's just people who are genuinely seeking truth versus people who are not genuinely seeking truth. And yeah, even people in my own life, family members and friends, I would be shocked to hear their opinions about things. And not that I couldn't see how they had gotten to that opinion, but it was almost as if they were, yeah, like you said, watching a very different movie than I was watching. And so I think in a real way, people were consuming very different content, very different media from very different sources. And those echo chambers really did create diametrically opposed realities of what's going on in our country, what's going on in our economy, what's going on geopolitically. And even when it came down to the candidates in this last election, just very different pictures of who those people were and what they were trying to accomplish. And yeah, it is very strange. If you look at, I don't think that that a computer is generally genuinely a perfect model for a human being. But if you look at us as some kind of a computer or a data processor, then you can't expect to get certain outputs without certain inputs. And it really did seem that people were just mirroring whatever source of information that they were receiving.
Yeah. Well, one of the white pill things that came out of that is we've seen it evolve, and probably for the last 8 years, but the lack of trust developing in mainstream media or corporate media. And you realize how much, um, again, with the information that's come to light over the last little while, how much the deep state, CIA, FBI, NSA, the Fed was influencing what was being reported. And if it's not outright lies of omission, in that old saying, your computer analogy, garbage in, garbage out. And I mean, I find myself, again, with my biases, reading something on, I don't watch any mainstream media at all. I have sources that have developed trust that I'll go to try and get information. But, again, I even have to be real careful and say, "Wow, that I really like that. I want to believe that. But is that my bias?" So then you got to look, and, sometimes you're like, "Yeah, I'm convinced on that topic," or, "Yeah, I really wanted to believe that, but it's just not true," as much as that pained me. So I, people on the trust thing, and people are busy trying to make a living that's being destroyed by the Federal Reserve, which we could talk about. Raise kids, raise a family, just live their lives, and it's don't have a ton of time. I'm retired, so I have more time than others, but to dig into every little thing, and we all want to think there's some father figure, somebody watching out for us, some benevolent leader or God or whatever that's gonna, unfortunately, we're on our own. You can't just blindly trust either side. You can't blindly trust anything you hear. You have to research, and, we all get sucked into some of those based on our biases, believing something that we shouldn't have. But I, I think that's a big white pill that people are realizing. I talk to a lot of people, even people from both sides, left and right, are like, "I don't know what to trust anymore." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm with you. But here's the podcasts I like, or here's the independent news people that I trust that you can go to, and you look at different viewpoints." So a lot of people are asking that question. You look at any of the graphs on trust in mainstream media, and it's just collapsing, which I think is a really good thing. Dangerous, can be dangerous, but
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because the if you listen to mainstream media, particularly on the left, they paint a very specific picture of the type of people who would support the Republican candidate Donald Trump. And they want to, they want to use terms that make these people look evil in a way.
Yep.
But I think that the truth is that the majority of people who ended up voting for Donald Trump going to the right, or at least voting towards the right, I think most of them are not thrilled. I think most of them are cautiously optimistic, meaning that they didn't get this outcome that they absolutely knew they could trust. They just
Right.
got an outcome that was headed more in the direction of transparency, and a big part of it right now, especially with Doge, is just opening up the books and letting us see what the government's been spending money on, and operating in a way where the people actually have a voice.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the Doge topic, I love it. I feel bad because when there's so much corruption and it's so bad, let's say 10% is good stuff. Maybe it's 5%, but 90% is just absolute criminal money laundering, CIA fronts to manipulate other countries. And so unfortunately, some good stuff is going to go with all the bad, but I don't see it's so big, so monstrous. I can't even say that word.
Yeah,
Monstrous.
such a
That
monstrosity. Yeah,
it's big.
yeah, it's huge.
A scalpel isn't going to work. You can't go
Right.
in and surgically, and so it's just so. I think the best thing is I've seen out of the whole is Doge and just trying to trim it because people don't realize the national debt, the budget, and what that's eventually going to lead to. And we could talk about that. But um, it it's we can't ignore economic reality. It's going to hit us at some point, and we can do this in more of a controlled fashion, like Doge is trying to do. Or we can wait till it collapses and it'll be an absolute disaster. And it will. It might not be tomorrow or in a couple years, but we see this through history when empires do wars around the globe or overextend themselves and go into massive debt and then do fiat money and money printing. And it does not end well. And so, yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic that we can get ahead of this. It's going to be painful. There's no doubt. Um, the other thing with Trump, yeah, people, if you hear he's a racist and you ask why, and it's like, well, this soundbite, you're like, wow, yeah, that does sound bad. And then you listen to the whole soundbite and you're like, well, that's out of context. So during this election, I was clearly not going to, I mean, Kamala is just awful. And the whole way the DNC once again manipulated things and just threw this person in that was clearly unqualified. Um, but I really liked RFK Jr., some of his stuff, some not so much, but he seemed honest and wanting to do the right thing. I'm a big fan of like Tulsi Gabbard, and these are long time Democrats that were jumping ship, because libertarians, it's kind of a classic liberal stance. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do when those people started rallying around. I'm like, yeah, this is clear. We are in great danger. And this is, although not perfect, and some of the things, I could certainly rip on Trump for some of the things makes me really nervous. But then there's other stuff that I'm like, wow, this is really a revolution going on that we're living through. And let's hope it stays nonviolent.
Yeah, agreed. I think I think I agree with most of what you said there. It's really hard for me to really believe in political figures
Yeah.
because I've grown up in a world where the people that had authority over me at different times turned out to be doing things that I found detrimental to my health, my mental health, my emotional health, my financial health. And so I think there's a real problem when we try to turn any of these figures into some kind of a caricature or some kind of an archetype. We see them as a hero or something. But yeah, in general, what it seems like is that the entire country was being polarized either to the right or the left, and it felt even this election felt so very different from the 2016 election when Trump ran the first time. I remember Trump being some kind of a media character, and I never really thought about him as a politician. I had no strong opinions about him one way or the other. I didn't even vote. But at the time, I remember hearing that Trump had won that day and just thinking how funny it was. Like, what a world are we living in? Like, it just seems so strange. And it almost seems as if the left had just left him alone. If they had just not come after him so hard in the media and in the courts, that there would never have been as big of a buzz, that he never would have been able to generate, the following that he has today. And I certainly wouldn't know nearly as much about him. I wouldn't think about him if they hadn't come at him so aggressively. But then what that also did was you could tell that there was not a genuine pursuit of truth in much of the country. It felt much more tribal or cultish. And especially you saw like a very strong push for a new type of morality that felt very unnatural for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so then you get what you were describing as these left-leaning politicians, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and the entire left-leaning Silicon Valley, like all the VCs, many of the CEOs who were lifetime Democrats who switched sides as well, because they could see that new push, that this new idea of what morality was actually destroying everything. It was like tearing apart the way that things operated. And even there's this funny thing that the mainstream media will do today where they talk about how the right has this cohort of new media presence, like a lot of the podcasters, a lot of the what we might call influencers who have swung the people towards the right. But the truth is that many of them were also lifelong Democrats who also got pushed away by this new form of thinking. And it's a really interesting, like you're saying, it is like this revolutionary time. It's like this resetting of what the major parties are going to look like. And when I look at Republicans specifically, I grew up in a very religious household, and I grew up in a place where everybody was Republican. I don't know if I knew a Democrat. But when I look at the world today and the people who are talking about who are supporting the Republican Party today, and I talk to people my age, none of them sound like the Republicans that I grew up around when I was younger. And the biggest reason I would say is because none of them seem to trust, none of them trust the media, but also none of them seem to trust the government establishment itself in a way where my parents and my grandparents, they just wholeheartidly bought into what the government was talking about when it came to geopolitics, when it came to wars. And it seems like there's a big shift away from feeling like we need to be the police state of the world. And I think that in that way, it almost does seem like libertarian values are coming to the forefront because of all the chaos that's ensued.
Yep. There's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think we have the most libertarian executive branch that we've had for a long, maybe since the founding, which is a good thing. And I think if we're going to I'll tell you, my ideal world is to if we're going to have two parties, I'd rather have the Republicans and the Libertarians. Because the Democrats you're right, they have to completely rebrand themselves. But to your point about, growing up in a Republican home, and I mentioned my dad being a kind of a Reaganite, I always thought they meant smaller government, fiscal responsibility. And they haven't done that for decades, right? They all grow government. They all blow the budget up. They all increase the debt. So again, what we're seeing is hopefully to get at least to a balanced budget. If we just went back to, I think, 2019 spending of the government, we would actually have a balanced budget. This is not that far. I mean, I think as a libertarian, we got to go a lot farther. The other thing too, which was it was my top priority when I was running for Congress, was the wars. Speaking of the trust of the government, we have been lied to into every war for decades. And we could go back to, in fact, you could start poking holes in even World War I and World War II, how that came about. But nonetheless, Afghanistan lies, Iraq lies. Look what happened in like Yemen and Libya and stuff. So I think people are waking up to the fact we need to rein in the empire. We cannot be out nation building, regime change wars, manipulating, which is what we do, manipulate governments. We think we're going to force people to adopt our lifestyle. I mean, my opinion, Iran's certainly not a threat to us. Russia is not a threat. They're more culturally aligned to us than a lot of countries. China is not a threat to us. I mean, there's nobody that's going to invade the U.S., but they are a threat economically. China is, if we continue to spend all our money, go in massive debt, massive borrowing to finance unnecessary wars, instead of investing in infrastructure and technology that advances us, it's again the death spiral of empires. So I'm happy to see that the last 4 years scared the bejeebus out of us. Out of me. We're flirting with a war right on their doorstep. The nation with the most nuclear weapons. This war, I mean, Trump is right that this war could have been avoided. This war in Ukraine could have been avoided. I don't know what the count is, 1 million casualties on the Ukraine side. It's just horrifying. And, people say, well, Putin invaded Ukraine, but there were all these warning signs, and it started way before with our meddling in their election and the 2014 color revolution that we financed, and us promising that we wouldn't advance NATO any further, not 1 inch further east, and we kept marching it. I think 10 additional countries, and Ukraine was the reddest of red lines for Russia, and we talk about NATO, and it's just so irresponsible, and messing with nuclear armed nations, one misinterpretation, one human error, man, it's just a horrifying thing. I just read a book called Nuclear War, a Scenario. It was really good and really frightening, but to realize how fast this could unravel is just absolutely horrifying. And to see, okay, I mean, through 4 years, we never talked to Putin. We didn't really, we're in a war, we're in a hot war with Russia, basically a proxy war with Russia, and we're not even talking. How quickly that could get out of hand. So to see, I said just this week now, dialogue, I think the Secretary of State is talking to the equivalent in Russia. It's Saudi Arabia. I mean, we should at least be talking to find, otherwise it's insane. I'm just to ramble on a little bit further about war, the whole events in Gaza is just horrifying. And that's a long discussion, which, boy, I got in some pretty heated debates about, but you just can't kill tens of thousands of innocent women and children. I don't know what Trump's plan is. He kind of throws these, he does the art of the deal. He throws these big, he's a media master, I think. So he throws out these big troll things, get everybody's attention. And then, but look, he got The ceasefire started in Israel and Gaza, and um, so there's hope, and it's holding, and the hostages are being released. So, some of the stuff he says scares the bejeebus out of me, but I'm hopeful. We've got to end these wars. We've got to, again, our founding fathers warned us, no entangling alliances. And so we should exit NATO immediately. It's not a defensive organization. It's an offensive. Should have ended when the Soviet Union collapsed. And so, yeah, my biggest priority when I was running for office, and still I think, is we have got to end these wars. It's just too dangerous, and it's completely unnecessary. Treasure, lives, it's just are being lost. It's just got to end.
When I think about it, I think about a lot of things from a Jungian psychology perspective, and kind of the focus of that process of going through a Jungian approach is to achieve what's called individuation, which said in a lot, like you could say that in a lot of different ways. It's growing up, it's maturing, it's healing, but in some real way, it's about achieving a state of autonomy or sovereignty where you are in charge of yourself and you don't let other people, you're not easily swayed by other people's, the things that may in the past have upset you or triggered you. So you don't take out your emotion on other people. But a big part of it is also coming to realize that as a human and as an individual psyche, the way that you interpret the world affects the way that you interact with the world. And so a big part of that is when you're young and you haven't developed the proper understanding, and you haven't grown up in the proper ways in certain aspects of yourself and in your life, then what you end up doing is projecting anything that you don't like about yourself. You project outward onto other people, onto other situations. And in a way, it's a way of blaming and avoiding the difficult emotion of just telling yourself, like, yeah, I did this. Yes, this is my fault. Yes, I'm the one who's responsible for the way that I experience the world. And so I think getting into Jungian psychology and then paying attention to politics, there was like a lot of connection there for me about this idea of libertarianism, simply because it really is, it feels like it's this idea that everybody, we're in a republic and everybody gets to vote. So everybody needs to be a grown-up. Everybody needs to be, in a real sense, we all need to almost be sovereign over ourselves so that as a collective, we can manage this country properly. And what I see in this war debate, or this conversation around war, is a lot of people who just want to fall into very simple stories. They want to fall into almost really they want to boil it down to this discussion that has no nuance about good and evil. We're good and they're evil. And so it's very tribal. It's very it's like inside out, in group, out group. And so we're the good guys, that makes them the bad guys. And so if they do anything, clearly it's because they're bad and they wanted these bad things. They're evil. But just like you pointed out with the history leading up to where we are today with Ukraine, there are so many things that our country, I wouldn't say necessarily the people of our country, but our government and our military and our leaders, there were so many things that they did almost intentionally to provoke this war. And if you are listening to, one source of news, you're going to get a message that, I mean, the mainstream media, literally every time they talk about the war, they use these adjectives where they say things like unprovoked, this right. Unprovoked aggression, this unprovoked war. But if you're paying attention to other people who have actually been tracking it and are actually talking about it, they can go through and point out the very specific examples of how we provoked the war.
Yep.
And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, just philosophically, it seems like the libertarian movement, the libertarian ideal, even the way that you say that the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, it's all about, hey, we're going to take care of ourselves. We don't need you to take care of us. We're going to take care of ourselves. But in a real sense, that means that we're not supposed to go out and take care of everybody else.
Yeah. Um,
It's almost as if there's this, it's almost as if you get treated as the bad guy for pointing out that we do bad things. And it's very similar to, I talk about this all the time on my podcast with like psychologists and other guests, but when you grow up in a toxic family, if you're the one who points out the toxicity, you're treated as if you're the problem. And it's very similar in politics in America, whereas if you point out the toxicity that's coming from us, you're treated as if you're the toxic one.
yeah. So I'm certain libertarian ideals, were um, self-ownership, personal liberty, but that comes with personal responsibility. You know, again, people want like big brother, big government keeping them safe. I am all about free market, free speech as natural rights. And so we've gotten into the habit of expecting to be protected. So we just want to be simple. We want just sound bites. He's Hitler. He's Stalin. He's Satan. We just want these little one-line packages that the media's fed us forever. These, you get these 10-second sound bites, and that's your knowledge base of it. And again, another thing I think is great is the loss of trust in mainstream media, and then people, because they always assume people didn't have the attention span, and it's difficult. People have limited time, but to sit down and listen to a 1 hour podcast or even a 3 hour podcast, I mean, they're getting hugely popular. A lot of people are getting a lot of their information from this. And you're right. There's a lot of nuance. It's just not, life isn't just simple sound bites and good and bad. There's shades of gray, and people aren't perfect. So pick your leader, and you may love certain things he does, and other things scare the heck out of you. But, we're all humans. And so coming back to that, I worry a little bit about people putting too much faith in like the current administration. Like I think I'm changing subjects a little bit, but like executive orders, I think are unconstitutional, and I think they should be banned. But a lot of them that he's doing, I like. But the pendulum will swing. Maybe in 4 years, maybe in 8 years, maybe in 12 years. But and unless Congress gets fixed, and I don't know exactly how we do that, some of the improvements that we like, me as a libertarian, are just going to get switched back, and we go further down that road. So I don't know what else my point was there, but I'm, yeah, there's a lot of nuance. Like, yeah, the war again that you brought up, Putin invaded, you get the soundbite, Putin invaded Russia, or I mean, Ukraine. That is true. And if that's where you stop, Putin is Satan. But you look at the bigger picture. Okay, what did he just wake up one day and go, I'm going in, so you look back in history, and you look at our involvement, and you look at what they've said, and it's hard. There's a lot to it. And I'm not great at spewing the specific facts and dates and names, but man, it doesn't take long before you see, oh man, there's shades of gray here, and this didn't have to happen. You got to see the nuance in things. You can't just pull a sound bite of something that somebody said, and that characterizes the person. Oh, he's a racist. So I think again, I was, when you said that too, I was thinking about, I ski a lot, and in America, this is what I understand. I've never skied in Europe, but we have there's a term for this, maybe you'll remember, but we want every hazard mark, every cliff, every out of bound, every rock, so now we just ski with reckless abandonment because we think they're keeping us protected. And the injury rates are worse, as opposed to like you go into Europe and they have a little sign that says, hey, there's a crevasse over here somewhere, so good luck. And you're kind of, oh, I got to pay attention. Personal responsibility. I own my decisions and my actions. And I think we've got away from that with everything being taken care of. And I feel like the pendulum is swinging, that we're moving back to some personal responsibility and a more of a libertarian mindset, which I think is great. I think it's great for our kids. So yeah, I don't know, there's that term that they have for that, but
Yeah, I think from an economics term, I think you're talking about negative externalities, which is the way that they usually talk about it is with cars. So you make cars safer when people drive more like more dangerously, right? So there's more accidents.
oh yeah, they've done studies to show that.
Yeah. So yeah, at least from an economics terminology, they say negative externalities.
Yeah, if you're
And,
just wearing a seat, they did a study, I just saw that, where if you're wearing a seatbelt or not, if people are wearing a seatbelt, they tend to drive faster and a little more reckless. It's that
right.
kind of, yep.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense to me. In America, I said this when I spoke with Matt a couple weeks ago. I said that America is basically a Disneyfied country. It's like everywhere you go, it's like being at the mall. They everything is controlled for the sound, the temperature, the surface that you're walking on. There's just safety measures everywhere, and there's this idea of preparing the child for the environment versus preparing the environment for the child. And in America, we're definitely trying to prepare the environment for the child rather than get the child to grow up to be able to navigate various environments. And
I think that's a
what's
mistake.
yeah, it's a huge mistake. I mean, it's anti-adaptive, and as a species, that's what's made us so dominant on the planet, is that we're the most adaptive species. We can adapt to anything, but if we don't allow ourselves to, then we're actually setting ourselves up for potential for a big failure. It's like I think people have called it like anti-fragility.
And I think in fact, I think that was some of the problem we saw on the far left. We need struggles to evolve as humans. We need difficulty. We need challenges. We need meaning. And if we don't have that, like everything's controlled environment around us, then we find things to be, we create demons, we create monsters that don't really need to be there. Like, yeah. In fact, I tell my kids a lot that, I think there's a Jordan Peterson, I can't quote it exactly, but kids need to do dangerous things relatively safely. They're going to, you live in a bubble, and you're just not going to evolve and grow and prosper as a human. You have to let your kid, as much as the parent wants to protect the kid, you want to keep them safe. In fact, that's how they manipulated kind of vaccine story. But you want to protect your kid, but they need to get sick. They need to strengthen their immunity. They need to fall and crash on their bike and skin their knee, but they're wearing a helmet. So yeah, they could break their arm or something, but man, all these learning experiences are absolutely critical for kids. So we need struggle, or we'll make up things that don't need to exist to struggle against. So, yep.
Yeah, I think a big narrative that got pushed in America was this idea that you should feel bad for being born into such a great place. And it had something to do with this, where life became too easy for too many people. And I think deep down, unconsciously, they were aware, some part of their psyche was aware that they didn't earn it. And so rather than look at the opportunity as, oh, I can do the most good in the world, they actually just felt bad about it. They kind of felt bad about who they were and how lucky they were and how other people weren't so lucky. And I think that's just the absolute wrong way to approach it. I think that if you're born into a very fortunate situation, then it's, you were gifted this opportunity to do things that other people can't do. So don't just be lazy and don't just be a consumer and don't just feel bad about it, but go and build and create and actually help in a way that actually affects lives rather than just propagating a negative story.
Yep, I completely agree. Um, Another libertarian philosophy, in fact, kind of what the current party is pushing is decentralization. And like you said, it does get frustrating to you feel like you can't really have a huge impact globally or on the federal government or whatever, but just getting involved in your community or getting on the school board or running for a local office, or there's lots of stuff that has more immediate and rewarding things that you can do, volunteering, at for some charitable event, things like that, that people, okay, we are pretty privileged. And I think we should appreciate that. So put the work in. In fact, it made me think of people on the far left. They talk about universal based income, which I think is a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, people need to, you don't want to, we're a rich country. Somebody shouldn't be starving to death or living on the streets. But um, God, I had friends even growing up that were in real wealthy families and didn't appreciate things. Like I remember I bought a car for $300. Me and my dad was a mechanic. We put a motor in it. I painted it, and I loved that car. I babied it. It was a 67 Cougar. And I had friends that parents were wealthy and I'd give them a Mustang and they would just absolutely destroy it in a year. And I'm like, wow, this is just interesting that you don't appreciate it. You got to work for it. So yes, we are in a privileged position. So put some effort, look outside your own little narrow window. Can you improve your community? Can you get involved in politics? There's tons of things to do if you just look.
Yeah. And a big part of it is just improving yourself. Just, again, going back to Jungian psychology, just pulling back the projections and see the parts of yourself that are actually influencing the world around you. And the more you become aware of how your shadow side or your unconscious side affects those around you through your behaviors, your patterns, even the way you see the world, you can adjust those gradually until you actually do less damage. And from like a libertarian perspective, that self-ownership, I feel like that's a very important part of it. I want to get into, we've been going for quite a while, but I want to get into some very specific things. So just really simply, we started off talking a lot about free speech when we first jumped on the call. Free speech, and then you also brought up free markets or open markets. And I wonder if you could maybe just share some of the just the way that you think about it. Like, what should free speech look like in your opinion? And what is the value of freedom of speech compared to maybe some of the messages that are being shared in the world today?
I um, I believe in complete free speech, no censorship, no regulation, no control by the government. There is a lot of bad speech out there, but the best solution to that is better speech. If you have, I mean, you hear about like, okay, a neo-Nazi group. Nobody wants to hear from them. But if you cancel them, kick them off social media, then they just go somewhere else and they can spread that kind of hate. It grows. I would rather know who's talking like that, see it up front, and try to make better arguments. To censor them is a disaster. We already have laws where if I call for direct actionable violence against you, that's not free speech. We have laws to protect that. But hate speech is free speech. And if we can't have open dialogues and conversations, then we don't progress as a society. I think it's absolutely, I mean, the founding fathers, the brilliance of them still to this day is astounding to me, and the things that they risked in doing that. That's number one. And if we lose that, you know, silent, we go to the gulags. I, I really have, I can't emphasize the importance of, you know, the freedom of speech, religion, assembly, uh, press, etc. So, yeah, it's an absolute for me. Kind of like the Second Amendment is an absolute for me. I think hate speech is free speech. Might not be speech you like, but uh, I think it's best to hear it, know who's speaking it, try to use better arguments, but not to censor people. Especially you don't want the government, because we saw that with the last 5 years, misinformation, malinformation that turns out, you know, somebody is making these decisions, censoring people, and it turns out to be that they were wrong and you were right. You know, and I lived through some of that.
Yeah, free. I agree with everything you said. Freedom of speech is anyone who's in the pursuit of truth wouldn't fear speech. And so if you censor somebody, you may be censoring somebody who's saying things that are beneficial to the world, or you might be censoring somebody who is saying things that are detrimental to the world. So in the case that you're censoring somebody who's saying beneficial things, that just indicates that the person who's doing the censoring doesn't want the truth. And as a civilization, as people, if we stop accepting the truth, if we reject the truth, then we are going to impede our progress. We're going to hurt ourselves. We're going to hurt the future of our children. But then also, I really like what you said about censoring people who are saying things that are actually detrimental to society and to civilization. So you could take any extremist group that has views that hateful views towards any group of people, or any kind of authoritarian views about who should control the world. If you censor those people, they don't stop talking. They just stop talking
Right.
in front of everybody.
Right.
And so if they go, if they have a public forum, at least you can combat their ideas with better speech. At least the people who aren't sure about how they feel or how they think, when they hear those ideas, they can hear somebody else debate those ideas.
Exactly.
I think the quote is something like "sunshine is the best disinfectant." Yeah, and that really is how it is. If you and because people are people, that's the thing. Anytime you see this any kind of authoritarian behavior, it makes you wonder. If they don't see people as people, meaning that we all have the same type of reaction to being mistreated or to being silenced. It's not going to make us feel good. It's going to make us feel angry. And we're going to seek out, it's going to come out in other ways where we're going to do it in secret, or we're going to do it, it's going to come out in a violent way. And those are the worst types of outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. The other quote is something like, if truth destroys something, then it probably needed to be destroyed.
Right. If it's true, then we should be able to handle it.
Right. That's another thing. Speaking of that, yeah, through like, in fact, it ties to what we were talking about previously too. I want the truth. I want to be treated as an adult. Give me the information. I'm a big boy. I can deal with it. I can help my family resolve things, but I just want the truth. Might be painful. I might not like it, but yeah, I agree. And our society evolved to the sheltered, protected thing that was just going to explode at some point. So hopefully we're through that. Yeah, people like the COVID pandemic, oh, we didn't know, or we're just trying to protect people or whatever. Just give us the facts and then let us make a decision. Am I a healthy 32-year-old with no comorbidities? Let me live my life. Let me continue to work. Am I 82 with, asthma and recovering from cancer and stuff, then that decision with the facts is going to be different. But just give us the facts. I hate being treated like a child.
Yeah, I do too. I just want, yeah, I just want to be an adult, and I want to be surrounded by other adults. But it does require everybody taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah.
What about economics, free markets, capitalism? Because I think capitalism is something that has been so attacked. It's been shocking to me how often I see people attacking the idea of capitalism.
Yeah.
Uh, what are your thoughts on all that?
One, we don't have a capitalism society. We have corporatism or crony capitalism. Um, yeah, there's, um, I was thinking of this meme, but I don't know how I could describe it, but the government will do something and then they'll blame it on capitalism when it's corporatism. Um, yes, I'm a study as much as I can of Austrian economics and free markets. Um, we need to get the deep state government control of corporations. We need it to stop. People have this myth or this idea in their head that government protects them from corporations. And it's the opposite. It's absolutely the opposite. Big government empowers monopolies and corporations. Big government has the monopoly on violence. They have the rules, the regulations, the licensing, the bureaucracy. They,
They even recently they've had the ability to just cut people off from the banking system.
yeah, we saw that in Canada with the truckers. Um,
Even here in the U.S. during the Biden administration, there were Silicon Valley CEOs who their companies were cut off from the banking system, and their businesses went out of business.
yeah. Well, we saw um, Zuckerberg and who was it that owned Twitter? Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey.
Um, and there was one other one. Maybe it was Bezos or somebody. But as soon as they aren't censoring what they want them to censor, they brought them in and had them speak in front of Congress. And basically, I mean, you're talking to the people that the mafia that has the monopoly on violence that can, I mean, you may be a billionaire, but guess who the people that own the bombs and the guns and the military tell you what to do. And so it's manipulated. We've seen, especially with, again, the Twitter files and stuff that's come out just recently within the last year, that how government, CIA, the FBI was manipulating these large corporations, and all this bureaucracy kills competition. So a lot of times the big companies are happy to get in bed with the government officials, with the big government, because they stifle competition. Some genius somewhere that has a new idea that wants to get started and then just gets crushed by all the costs and the uh, licensing requirements and the tax forms and stuff. So yeah, we need to we need to get back to true free market capitalism. People blame whatever they don't like on capitalism when it's corporatism, and the government is not your friend here. They've distorted our entire system, and we have anything but a free market system. So yeah, I'm an advocate for that. I'll also make a plug. A lot of some of your listeners, there's the Mises Institute, which is Austrian Economics University, basically. Um, People can find it online. They have just tons of free audiobooks, PDFs, podcasts. They publish stuff weekly. It's just a great organization. I try to glean as much from it as I can. They have just free books from Rothbard and Ron Paul and Mises and et cetera. The whole list of, certainly a libertarian foundation for our economic principles. But yeah, it's a wealth of information. So um, people that want to study economics, in fact, I invest a lot, or I need to, because it's kind of my job. I need to not outlive my money. So it's even helped in understanding how um, fiat money and the Federal Reserve and how they manipulate interest rates and quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, what that does to the market and that type of thing. It's really helpful. Um, yeah, and then just the last thing, getting back to sound money. When there's that what happened in 1971, a website that shows all these horrid effects that have occurred since we got off the gold standard, and they could just create money out of thin air. Um, I think people are waking up to this, which is encouraging, is inflation is painful and it's a tax. This is not, corporations are always greedy. Capitalism is kind of driven by greed, but it's, as a consumer, and my dollar has bigger weight on a company than does my vote on the federal government, I think. So the Federal Reserve and the federal government and the limitless money printing, the manipulation of the free market, interest rates, quantitative easing, that creates an inflation. The Federal Reserve, they have this arbitrary, which they just made up, 2% inflation. So that means they're robbing you 2% per year. And we haven't been to 2% since 2020. It's a made up number. It's kind of the frog in the boiling water. They can dilute the money supply by 2% a year and people didn't complain. Well, it's getting out of hand. But it's a tax. It's an inflation tax. And really it's worse than the 2%, 3%, 4%, or probably over 3% now that we're suffering from, because technology and economy of scale rises, things would be getting cheaper. Our standard of living would be improving. So they rob a lot of that, that value that we'd be getting. Plus they inflate the dollar with that inflation tax. So I think people are waking up to that. The politicians always just blame greedy corporations, but they need to look in the mirror. Just one last point, and then we can get to the next discussion. But people love to blame Biden for inflation. And it's true, but they don't think Trump in his 4 years created inflation, and they printed trillions of dollars and helicopter moneyed it out to everybody. So you get your, whatever it was, $1,200 stimulus check. And I guarantee most everybody has lost that times 2 or 3 or 4 inflation that they paid. And inflation, printing that money and distributing it, usually the well-connected get it first, so they can buy stuff before the money gets into the economy and all prices start going up. So it creates this Cantillon effect of wealth separation, again, by the federal government. So both parties are equally guilty in inflation that we suffered with. I'm hopeful that energy is a big part of it. So if we improve our energy infrastructure, things can get better. New discoveries can make things better, et cetera. But, I just really want to emphasize, so people understand, inflation is the federal government. They are doing that to you. They're robbing you. That's an additional tax.
Yeah, from a very simple economic perspective, it's supply and demand. And if they just constantly create the supply, then even without a higher demand, the price goes up.
Yep. Yeah, I always tell people, if that's not the case, then they should just print $1 million for everybody and just give it to everybody.
Yeah, it wouldn't
not
yeah,
tax.
it'd be terrible.
You'd be paying $10,000 for a loaf of bread, but you'd be a millionaire. So it's funny.
Yeah, and you see it in the real estate market too, where every like real estate prices have skyrocketed to the point where I think I saw that the average home buyer is 55, which is so old. Like, because people in their 20s and 30s who are working good jobs and are trying to take care of their kids, they can't buy houses.
I know.
So it's in the 50s, but the same thing is happening where your value it looks like it's going up, but it's actually not an increase in value. It's just an increase in inflation.
Right. And Federal Reserve, part of their was it now $7 trillion balance sheet. They buy these mortgage-backed securities. So same thing that happened with education, which we talk about why it's so expensive. Anytime the government gets involved in something, the price goes up tenfold. But they buy all these mortgage-backed securities, flood the system with money. Yeah, I feel bad for kids. In fact, they're destroying the middle class. People can't buy a home these days, and I have kids. That's a problem. And in fact, one of the things I remember Kamala was talking about giving new first-time home buyers like $10,000. Was that the number or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was 20,000, and
Maybe it was 20 or
yeah,
25. But guess what?
the
The
price just
price
went up
just went up
20,000. Yeah. Yeah,
$20,000.
the median home
It's just
price,
so
yeah.
stupid. I'm like, oh, please just understand some basic economics of how the system works and realize how the government is screwing us over. And that's why, again, back to Doge and just you're going to throw, unfortunately, some good stuff out with the bad, but it's 95% bad. It's got to go.
Agreed. Okay, Todd, we've been all over the place, talked about a lot of stuff. But there's one topic that I saw on your website that I'm actually really curious about from a personal perspective, because I've got an acre here in Idaho and I'm trying to figure out what to do with some of it. And we've talked about maybe getting goats. And I saw on your
Oh, you
website,
saw.
I saw on your website that you do goat packing.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of this in my life, but I saw this video where this guy was trying to explain the benefits to goat packing versus, say, horses or mules. And he had some really good points. And so I wanted to understand how into goat packing you actually are. And then I want to hear like your personal take on its benefits or why it's fun or why you do
All
it.
right. Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't do as much as now as I used to, but I do still have goats. Um, yeah, I'm here in Idaho with my 7.5 acres of independence, and love it. Uh, no, Idaho sucks. Tell all your friends. I'm also a musician. I have a kind of a popular song that's called Idaho Sucks. Tell all your friends. Anyway,
I try to tell as many people as I can how terrible
it's
Idaho is.
yeah, it's that satirical sort of thing. But I used to do a lot of backpacking, and then I do a lot of bow hunting, a lot main hunting, but mainly archery hunting. And I love backpacking into the mountains. I love Idaho, high mountain lakes and stuff. And I had kids, and I wanted them to experience that, but I can't carry 100-pound pack 7 miles. So I started looking into llamas, horses, mules. In fact, I got a horse the neighbor gave me that I knew it was going to end up killing me because I wasn't used to them. And I came across goats. And so me and a buddy each bought two goats, and it was great. They can't carry a ton of weight. These are big goats. People always think of the little pygmy goats. I have had goats that usually in the 160, 180, even over 200 pounds. Um, so I get them in shape. They can carry 35, 40 pounds, probably as high as 50 pounds if we're like going downhill or something. Cause I've carried elk quarters out with them. I'll put a boned out hind quarter on a goat, and they'll carry it out. There's hardly any training. They're kind of like, they have a personality of a dog in my mind. They're like an herbivore dog. They just come to me when I whistle. You get them and you bottle raise them. So they bond to you, and they want to be around you. They just follow you. I don't have to lead them unless we're with a lot of people. Um, so yeah, I got them so that I can put a little day pack on my kids. They could hike several miles into the mountains, and then I can have the goats carry a bunch of stuff. We'd have a real nice, comfortable camp. We did several of the highest peaks around like Utah and Idaho and Wyoming with goats, and um, carried out. You get an elk and you're 5 miles back, and you have a horse you got to carry out, and there's two of you. But yeah, we've loaded up the goats and carried them out. So it's worked pretty well. Goats are fairly inexpensive. You can still buy, it's getting more popular. and you need good genetics, but people are raising goats just for pack goats. And you can buy a good genetic kid goat for like $300. And then you got to get like a little cross buck and some gear for it, but still relatively inexpensive. People with young kids really like it. Hunters, it's really nice because goats can go. We've been to places that horses couldn't get to, that goats can they're just so agile and can scramble up. So yeah, I have a couple goats still. I haven't done it much, just been kind of busy, but yeah, I need to get back into it. It's a lot of fun. You kind of get attached to them. They become kind of like dogs. They're just pets. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that's my goat story.
I think it sounds so much fun. I love backpacking. I love being back in the backcountry. And I have that same issue, is that I want to take my kids, but it's a long hike for short legs, and
Yep.
especially if they've got to carry something. But I saw this video where a guy was explaining the benefits of goats over horses, and he said a lot of the same things you did. But the thing that really stood out to me was he said that if a horse gets spooked, it'll turn around and run right back to the trailer. And so that might be 5, 10 miles back, 20 miles back, depending how far you've gone. But he said that the way the goats operate is if they get spooked, they'll look to where you are and run right to you.
Yeah.
And so that just sounded like, yeah, the idea of, I'm not a horse person, so the idea of trying to manage a horse just sounds so overwhelming. But goats, I'm like, oh yeah, goats. I think I could figure
Yeah.
that out.
My neighbor loved the guy, but he had this big horse guy, and he'd tease me that, well, if you get hurt, you aren't going to ride your goat out of the wilderness. And I'm like, well, if I get hurt, it was probably because I had a horse and it kicked me or something. But yeah, I've had goats. I mean, the biggest concern with goats is people's dogs when we've been hiking on trails and people that don't have control of their dogs. But yeah, you have a 200-pound goat with horns running right at you, or your family, and it's, there's a little bit of risk there too. Because yeah, they'll be running to you for protection. But we've had tons of fun. It's worked out really well for us. So yeah, I've yeah. There's another guy, Zach, that's in the Libertarian Party. They raise goats and they eat them. I've never ate. I think I've heard that more people around the globe eat goat meat than cow meat. Um, but I've had them for so long. In fact, I tried goat milk once, and to save you the gory details, I mean, you get like peed on and stuff. And I just couldn't do it. I'm like, oh, it just tastes like what a goat smells like. And
Yeah. Yeah,
these
I'm
are,
not thinking about it for meat or milk, or
yeah.
I don't want to be that into it.
Well, people do go pack. They'll have one lactating doe. Usually they're called wethers, but they're geldings, castrated goats. That's what you use to pack. But they'll take one lactating doe and they'll milk it, and then they'll pick berries, raspberries, or whatever, blueberries or huckleberries or something, and they make yogurt up the middle of nowhere. And but yeah, I couldn't. I love goat cheese, but I couldn't do goat's milk. So
Yeah,
it's
sounds like an adventure.
there you go. More than
Yeah.
you wanted to know.
All right, Todd. Well, I really appreciate this. This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate how passionate you are about all this stuff, and it's been fun getting into it with you. If people wanted to find your like what you're doing as far as involvement with the Libertarian Party or any upcoming elections, any kind of community events, that kind of thing, where would they find you?
Sure. So I have my website, toddcorsetti.com. I don't know how long that was for my campaign. I don't know how long I'll keep it going, maybe indefinitely, but I would encourage people. I don't think people realize that there's the Libertarian National Party and then there's Libertarian Party of Idaho. Because there's something like 12,000 registered libertarians in Idaho for voting, which I think it's actually a lot more, but people want to maintain their Republican status so they can vote in the primaries. But they can go to lpid.org to get information. It'd be great to have more people join the Libertarian Party of Idaho. Um, I'm on social media. Twitter is probably where I'm most active. Same with the Libertarian Party of Idaho. I do most of, well, Matt actually manages their Twitter account. I manage the Facebook and Instagram. But you can find me or the Libertarian Party of Idaho on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. would be a good way to contact us also, or just go to our website. Yeah, I would encourage people to join, if not, yeah, the national party, but also join the uh, state party. And we do have a convention coming up March 15th. Idaho's broken into 3 regions for Libertarian Party of Idaho. We're in region 3 here in Eastern Idaho, and we rotate the convention. We have a convention yearly. It's on March 15th at the university here, Idaho State University. So everybody's welcome to attend. If they're not members, they can't vote at this point. But yeah, we have that coming up next month.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks again. And if I'm ever over there in East Idaho, I'll hit you up and we can go pack some goats
All
around
right,
the
I'll give
mountains.
you the
Yeah.
goat
Yeah,
rundown.
yeah. Okay,
Sounds
appreciate
good.
it. Okay,
All
thank you
right,
so
thanks,
much.
Josh.
Okay, bye.
Bye.